It comes at a difficult time for China's economy because of very stringent environmental restrictions. The country's been dealing with issues around power supply for several months at the moment, and in certain parts of the country, the key power producing regions, there's real shortages of coal, which have been driven by very high the cost of coal, which is making the production of electricity unprofitable for the farms that are doing it. So it's been a real challenging issue, and these floods have exacerbated that supply issue to some extent. Although the part of the country which it hit in particular isn't playing a huge role in terms of production of coal for electricity at least.
Yeah.
So it's adding to the bad news for China's economy in the near term, but I would say the worst is probably past us now.
Yeah. So in terms of the coal crisis, the energy crisis, what is going to relieve this problem?
Well, I think in the near term, and we've already seen this from the government, is going to be an increase in domestic production of coal, particularly from regions like in Mongolia. I think they recognise that perhaps some of the stringency around some of the environmental policies might have to be eased up a little bit in the near term in order to return power supply to normality. So we're looking at both of those things. I think the interesting long-term question for China is if this raises questions about the broader green sustainability agenda and moving away from coal as the main sort of power input. At the moment, we think China's still very committed to that agenda, but it certainly does highlight the possibility that this road is going to be quite a bumpy one, and not just for China as we transition to a cleaner energy future.
How prepared are they for alternative energies?
Well, I think certainly China's got very ambitious plans in terms of renewable and alternative energy, and much more is coming down the line as well. But there's still very high levels of dependence on fossil fuels, and particularly coal, in terms of primary energy supply at the moment. So this is going to be a multi-year, perhaps multi-decade transition. It's not going to happen overnight. And during that period of transition, there are going to be times like we're seeing at the moment where things get a little bit difficult. So you need to have quite adept regulation, and government needs to be responsive to facts on the ground. And I think probably recent months suggested they haven't quite got that level of responsiveness in place yet. So there need to be some improvements there in order to avoid situations where you have power shortages affecting businesses and households too.
Yeah, so how long do you think it's going to take for the full impact of these short-term shutdowns, as you say, of factories, of businesses, to impact the economy, the broader economy?
Well, I think it already has impacted the economy, and certainly, as I said, these actually have been happening since the middle of the year and have already had a big impact on industrial production in some parts of China, particularly the parts of China, the coastal provinces, which are exporting goods from China to the rest of the world. So we've heard many stories about factory shutdowns in parts of China already. More recently, I think the problem got wider. We sort of see electricity shortages affecting households in some parts of China as well. We do think the worst is probably over, and we're now seeing the policy response kick in. As I said, a commitment to increase coal supply in the near term. But I do think these issues are going to be reoccurring ones during this quite challenging transition to green energy. So the worst may be over now, but that's not to say it won't happen again at some point in the future.
Tons of coal are sitting on Chinese ports from Australia that they have banned. We are hearing reports that some of that has been left off to relieve the pressure points. Is there a chance that China will consider trading with Australia again for coal?
I think probably that's, as you said, there are some reports that some of these coal shipments have now been released into markets. So I think, given the shortages at the moment, clearly China will be looking to grab hold of what supply it can do as it moves around these power outrages. In terms of how far they'll go there, let's wait and see. In terms of where Australians' coal supply, in terms of meeting China's domestic demand, is a very small portion of the market, perhaps around 2%. So it doesn't have quite a big role in terms of meeting Chinese demand. But at the moment, and certainly in the critical situation, there's clearly factors there which are pushing China to take perhaps a different attitude than what it has in recent years. And I think there's sort of broader geopolitical factors coming into play as well. And I think with China looking for membership of the CPTPP, which for which it needs Australian support, there is a chance that some of the trade tensions that have been a big issue in the relationship for 2-3 years now may begin to just stabilise a little bit in the short term.
Yes, and there won't necessarily be any public admission of a softening by China, but the leadership is running into more problems than they might have thought when they first started these sort of sanctions against Australia.
Maybe. I think let's see whether they think it's been an effective strategy or not. I think probably on reflection, maybe they'll recognise it as not being terribly effective in terms of the direction of politics in the region at the moment. But I would hesitate to make a conclusion that the restriction on Australian coal, for example, is playing a major role in driving the power problems at the moment in China. It's much more driven by domestic policy choices, particularly around climate change, rather than tied up with the trade dispute with China.
Great to talk, Tom. Thanks so much.
Thank you.